I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, in the beginning of the 20th century, there were some notorious outlaws, people like Pretty Boy Floyd and Babyface Nelson. Well, there were other gangsters during that era as well. Some were less known, some were not bad all of the time. One of these that fit in the category of that is Emmett Long. He is an outlaw, but he also turned his life around. He was selectively lawless. And that is the name of a book written by my next guest. His name is Asa Dunnington. The book is called Selectively Lawless, The True Story of Emmett Long, an American Original. Asa, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, Logan. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's my pleasure. Once a newspaper man, always a newspaper man. So when you see a good story, it really gets to you. You don't let go of it and you follow through. And that's what you did with this book. You heard the story of Emmett Long, and then years later, you put it into print. Tell me a little bit about that process.
I met Emmett. He was my uncle by marriage. And I met him 11 years into my marriage. In 1969, he had invited us to New Mexico to his motel for vacation. And I had heard stories about Emmett from my wife's family, and I was anxious to meet him. And when we finally met, we just had good chemistry. And he was 65 years old. He was at the point in his life where I think he was ready to tell his life story. And he knew I had a newspaper background. So I guess it made a good choice for him and for me. But I couldn't tell this story in 1969 because Emmett had killed 4 people. So I had to wait until he had left this earth.
Yeah. He was a mixed bag, Emmett. He was a good guy and he was a bad guy. Tell the audience a little bit about that. What was the bad part of him? You already mentioned he killed 4 people.
He left the family. He was a member of a sharecropper family. His father was a lay minister, and he would take the family either picking cotton in Texas or building fences in Texas and Oklahoma. When he was 14 years old, he decided he wasn't doing that anymore. And he left home, or he left his family, and had a cousin that was a card sharp. And he went to her home and learned how to play cards illegally, and went on the road for 18 months from town to town, from ranch to ranch, and traveled all the way from Texas to Arizona and then up into the Northwest, where he went to a barber college to learn to cut hair. And then he hit every logging camp and cut hair in the daytime and gambled at night. To make a long story short, 18 months later, he went back to Oklahoma. He had $18,000 in a brand new Buick Roadster.
Amazing, amazing. So he was able to parlay a small fortune back then, or a large fortune back then, right, through his gambling.
That 18,000 funded his bootlegging business start.
It's probably 1.8 million today, right? Something like that.
Probably, yeah.
Amazing, amazing. But when you met him, he was a changed man. He had turned his life around. He was an upstanding citizen. Tell us about the upstanding part of Emmett Long.
Emmett was a rancher. He had bought a lot of Indian leases where he lived in Cache, Oklahoma. Cache is the Comanche headquarters, tribal headquarters. And he bought a lot of leases from the Comanches there and turned that into a cattle ranch. And he was always looking for ways to make money. And somehow he found out about this motel in mining country in New Mexico in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And so when we met him, that's when he was trying to make money from that motel. And he was a philanthropist at that point. He did a great deal to support local schools in Oklahoma. And he was the kind of guy that if you needed the money, he'd find a way to get it to you.
Yeah. So what do you account for his change? He was lawless in the beginning, like you said, selectively lawless. Right. He seems like he could turn it on and turn it off, right?
I think two things. When he got married, his wife was a cute little school teaching barrel racer that he met in rodeos that he used to set up in Cache. And she changed his personality a lot. Mm. But then when he became a father, he really changed. He just became more like his father at that point than by the outlaw that he had been.
Though that is a profound change. I mean, getting married does change a man. Having children changes a man. So he was given a second chance, if you will. Did he ever do any time behind bars for his ill-gotten gains?
Yes. The way he functioned free of the law when he was in Cache, I told you that's Comanche headquarters. He would pay the Comanches $1 a piece to vote for his sheriff. And so he controlled the law there for 8 years. But he was also paying off a revenue agent. And that revenue agent became envious of the money that Emmett was making and decided to go into business for himself. But he got caught by the law and he gave up Emmett. So Emmett spent 2.5 years in Leavenworth.
Mm. Gotcha. Was that before he got married?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And there's a change after that.
He was only 25 years old when he moved to Leavenworth.
We've kind of, in many ways, kind of romanticized people like Pretty Boy Floyd and Babyface Nelson. They seem to be different than the common criminal, if you will, that we see today. Do you think there was anything different about these guys? Did they have more style, more flair? Were they?
Well, Emmett used to basically hide out Pretty Boy Floyd when he would come to Oklahoma, running from the law in Kansas City, where he usually operated. And they talked about Emmett getting into the bank robbing business. And one of the things that Pretty Boy Floyd did, and you have to remember this was during the Depression, he burned all the mortgages that he got from the banks that he robbed. Mm.
So he was kind of a Robin Hood.
Yeah.
Yeah. He did good things for certain people. And back then, some of the banks were pretty tough on those homeowners. They were quick to take away their property if they fell behind on their payments.
Exactly. So once the word got out, people were more ready to provide haven for Pretty Boy Floyd when he came to Oklahoma.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting indeed. He had an interesting life story. You have an interesting life story as well. Your other book is called What a Life, an autobiography. And apparently it was inspired by a jar of questions that your daughter gave you. Tell us a little bit about that.
it was my daughter-in-law. Gave it to me for Christmas. It looked like a candy jar that had strips of paper in it. And each strip of paper had either a question or a comment. And so I took out the jar. I'd take it piece by piece and write whatever came to mind. And the theory with the people that marketed those jars was that by the time you got to the bottom of the jar, you'd written your life story. And it turned out to be that way.
What were some of the questions on those strips of paper, if you recall?
Oh, gosh. What were you afraid of as a child?
Hmm.
What was your home life like with your mom and dad? Did you ever come close to dying? And such questions.
Intriguing questions, very good questions. Now, these weren't scripted by your daughter-in-law. They were actually some kind of gift that the questions were already pre-made, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Right. But it was inspirational to answer some of those questions, and it resulted in the book, your autobiography, What a Life. And you have had quite a life. You were born in a fantastic place named Logan. So Logan, Iowa is your birthplace. Of course, I
There
like
you
that.
go.
And
And
so you're a Midwesterner with Midwestern values, I'm sure. And then you were a newspaperman. You were in the Air Force. You were also working on a presidential campaign. Let's start with working as a newspaperman. Tell me how that all began.
I always had a way with words, even as a kid. I wrote poetry when I was 8 years old that my mother had published in the National Poetry Anthology. And so my favorite class in school was journalism. And I was an athlete. And so I was attracted to sports, became the sports editor for the newspaper in high school. And that drew attention to me by the regular newspaper profession. And I was invited by the sports editor at the San Gabriel News, a daily newspaper, to be a stringer.
Mm-hmm.
The stringer is somebody who covers high school sports for the newspaper. And that's how I started out as a writer.
Things have changed. Daily newspapers, particularly in local communities, hardly exist anymore. I guess you kind of lament the passing of journalism as you and I knew it. I started out in journalism in '83, and it's almost unrecognizable nowadays.
Yeah, it was amazing. The benefits that you got, even as a stringer. When the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles, I got access, a pass to the Coliseum where they started out. And it was interesting. You'd ride up the elevator to get to the press box. And the guy at the door was kind of the muscle man to make sure there was no riffraff in there. And when I came out of the elevator, he thought I was some kid trying to hide my way in. And I had to show him the press pass and show him I was legitimate.
That's wonderful. I mean, that's what I love best about journalism. And it's a quote I'm stealing from somebody, but they told me long ago that it's a front row seat to history in the making.
It is.
If the Dodgers move to LA, you're there. If, the Twin Towers crumble and you're working as a reporter, you're there. Whatever it is. I mean, you see the best of life, you see the worst of life, you see a lot of life, which is kind of very, very interesting. Then, so after you were working as a stringer for the newspaper, you drafted or enlisted into the Air Force?
I was in the Army Reserve when I was in high school. And and that was a 6-year commitment. And Logan, you don't remember this, but that was an obligation in those days. When you got out of high school, you had a 6-year commitment to the military, either reserve or full-time or combination thereof. So I got tired of Uncle Sam planning my vacations on the Mojave Desert. So
Exactly. So you wound up spending 6 years in the Air Force?
4.
4. Where did it take you? Where did you travel
went to Keesler Air Force Base right out of enlistment.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a year there learning to be an automatic tracking radar specialist. It was the equivalent. We went to class 4 hours a day, and we had 4 hours homework every night for a year. And that was the equivalent of a 3-year engineering degree.
Amazing.
And I was sent to Edwards Air Force Base, and you may not remember him, but Chuck Yeager was my wing commander.
Of course, I don't remember him. I remember learning about him. That's for sure.
Talk about living history.
Yeah, that's amazing. Amazing.
And I had the wonderful opportunity to work with astronaut trainees because we tracked their flights, their training flights, and it was just a great life.
Yeah, it sounds like it afforded you a lot of wonderful opportunities working with Chuck Yeager, those astronaut trainees during the time when, NASA was alive with energy and optimism and new discoveries. So that is amazing. Now, you also worked on a presidential campaign. Tell me about this.
When I got out of college, after I got out of the Air Force, I finished college, and I was hired by Mattel Toys. So I went to work for Mattel as a salesman in Orange County, California, and had risen to district manager in 2 years. And I hired a young man from Logan, Utah. You like that?
Good. Another great place.
Right. And anyway, he and I became close friends. We played together on the company fast pitch softball team, and it turned out that he was a good friend of a guy by the name of Ron Walker, who was in charge of the advance team for President Nixon. So when 1972 rolled around, I was then the Western Regional Manager for Mattel, and my friend Doug from Logan had always been impressed by my ability to handle logistics and planning and stuff like that. He thought I would make a good advance man. So I took a leave of absence. Well, not a leave of absence. I took a week's vacation, and I went to Minneapolis and worked the vice presidential event. And I guess I impressed them to the point they offered me a job. And that's how I became a lead advance man.
Amazing. And this was 72. So that was Nixon's second campaign, to re-elect the president.
Right.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of meeting Nixon, and he was a very nice man. I met him at a fundraiser in New York years ago. Tell me what it was like working with him.
Well, I worked for Vice President Agnew. And Agnew was a very interesting guy. He had a great sense of humor, a good command of the English language, which I appreciate. And he was fun to work for, but of course he got into trouble himself. And so that didn't last long. But during the campaign, we did 90% of the campaigning. I was in my early 30s. I was working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the campaign. During that period of time, the Secret Service had 63 agents hospitalized for exhaustion.
Wow.
So that gives you an idea of the kind of regimen we maintained.
It's amazing when you're in your 30s, you can have that kind of stamina and energy. I mean, I worked crazy hours too, from 6 in the morning till midnight or sometimes overnight. And, you're just able to fire on all pistons at that age. And particularly when you're on doing something exciting, like working on a vice presidential campaign or a presidential campaign, you can sustain that energy and that enthusiasm.
You know how I did it? You'll get a kick out of this. I had a voice teacher in high school, and she made us meditate prior to every class. And I took that ability to shut down into that campaign. I took a 4-hour break every day, and I was disciplined enough by her training to be able to hit the sack and go immediately to sleep.
Wow.
And I would have whichever secretary was working for us at the time wake me up for 4 hours. And
Amazing.
It was the equivalent of 8 hours sleep.
Amazing. Amazing. Good lessons learned then from that speech teacher, for sure.
Right.
We talked about the change in the newspaper industry, that newspapers as we knew it almost don't exist anymore. I pick up the New York Times today and I can't believe what I'm reading. This would never make the cut 20, 30, 40 years ago. Yeah. The same thing's true with politics. I mean, what's happening today in politics is unbelievable. Tell me your perspective on what's happening today in 2022 when it comes to politics and political races.
I never thought that I would ever see the Justice Department and the FBI politicized in my lifetime. That's just beyond belief.
Agreed. I mean, that shocks me beyond all pale. I can't believe other journalists aren't up in arms about it. But when you weaponize the FBI, you weaponize the Justice Department, when you look at, whether you love Trump or hate Trump, every person he ever worked with or worked for him has been prosecuted. I mean, this is what they do in China. This isn't what they do in the United States of America.
I just read Jared Kushner's book, and why he wasn't given the Nobel Peace Prize. It had to be just politics that kept him from it. I don't know if you read that.
I haven't read it, but
recommend it.
Nobel Peace Prizes apparently have been politicized as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
amazing. Well, it's an amazing journey you've had since you were born in 1939, if I recall correctly, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, you're still going strong. Your work is terrific. One of the books is called Selectively Lawless, The True Story of Emmett Long, an American Original. The other story is called What a Life, an Autobiography. And I think if you look at the journey that Asa Dunnington took during his life, I think you'll become a little introspective about your own life. So the things that he shares with you, I think will be a great trip down memory lane for readers as well. I'm sure you agree, Asa, that there's something that very self-introspective about these books.
Oh, absolutely. I encourage all my friends that are contemplating writing their life story to do so.
Absolutely.
Don't ever have to say what if.
You've got a great daughter-in-law. She gave you those that jar of questions, and it spurred a whole book, which is wonderful. It's been a true pleasure speaking with you, Asa. I'm so delighted that you joined us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you. I'm so glad we met.
Same here. Same here. I look forward to hopefully meeting you in person in the future, perhaps at one of the book fairs or something like that.
That'd be wonderful, Logan.
That'd be great. And to the viewers at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.